panel here. Okay, what are the buildings this part of my name is Kaabi, the Boston Consulting Group Global Energy Practice. And we have an unbelievable panel of ministers here. None of them needing introduction, but very quickly, His Excellency Shri Hardeep Singh Puri, Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas and Housing and Urban Affairs, and our host for this event, but also today's panel. Right next to him, His Excellency Saad Sherida Kaabi, Minister of State for Energy Affairs and Cabinet Member for Qatar. And right by him, Hon'ble Vickram Bharrat, Minister of Natural Resources of the Republic of Guyana. And finally, with that is His Excellency Haitham Al Ghais, Secretary General of OPEC. We start with a big round of applause for this incredible panel we have in front of us. The topic for this afternoon is energy security in a VUCA world. Just so I don't have senior movies on stage, I wrote down what VUCA meant, and I'm sure there are colleagues of mine out there that probably there's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That pretty much defines the world that we live in today. And so without further ado, I just wanted to start off with His Excellency Mr. Puri. Please just take us a little bit back to the last 2 years or so, and then a bit of a look forward. You have helped India navigate through volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, all of those four things in the last couple of years. Can you say a bit about some of the things that you've been able to do, and then how you see that going forward?
Thank you very much. Let me start by saying that it's good to acknowledge upfront, in the interest of full disclosure, that I don't ever cease to be amazed at the new acronyms and new terms that come in. But this VUCA is I think, an appropriate term, because it sounds like vulture or something like that. But all the ingredients of that are, volatility. I mean, you're being modest if you characterize the happenings of the last 2 years just as volatility. Uncertainty certainly goes with that. And whatever else, I would say that there are two abiding thoughts that I have of this case. One is that every time we face a crisis, and there have been multiple crises, if you're into the public policy space, you can't just talk about an energy challenge. There's food, fertilizer were also major challenges, and appeared almost insurmountable at one point in time. But on the energy front, I would say that I would choose my words very carefully. Many of these crises we face on the
energy front were self-inflicted. I mean, they were policy-induced. Something that I don't like to admit normally in a public forum, but I think it's about time we do it, that we started talking about transition to green, sustainable fuel usage, and almost as a concomitant of that, the investment in traditional fossil fuels stopped. Now, obviously, that was going to create a problem. Number one. Number two, it's not that there is a shortage of energy in the world. It's a different thing that the amount of energy being made available. So that's one problem. But I think your question to me is, how does India, a country largely dependent on imports? By largely, I mean, if you are dependent on crude oil, 85% of your requirements on imports, and gas also 50%, how did you do it? Well, I would say we did it thanks to a Prime Minister who saw it coming and we were able to do. We did a number of things. For instance, I'll give you one or two examples. We diversified the sources of our imports from 27 earlier to 39. On gas pricing, we took major reform. We used to earlier base the price on 4 international hubs and used to calculate on a 6-month and 1-year period. We realized that, by the time they were completely misaligned. and prices went very high once. So we had a new formula where we made it 10% of the India basket, crude basket, and we put a floor and a ceiling. I think $4 on the floor and $6.5. And so both on the petroleum, on the petrol and diesel front, and on the gas prices, while international prices were shooting up, India was one of the countries where actually over a 2-year period they came down. And similarly on gas, I think I answered a starred one question. Starred is the more serious answer questions in Parliament. And I was able to show that thanks to some very far-sighted decisions we took in April 23, we've been able to weather the storm. But I don't want to think that the worst is over. No, I think challenges both on the supply routes, with non-state actors doing what they are, with other turbulence that could take place. First, we had to deal with the problems in, on the Russia-Ukraine front. Then we had to deal with other issues. I think I am encouraged by my belief that there is a lot of goodwill around, and all the people in the decision-making will not allow problems which are causing anxiety now to exacerbate so that it become worry points.
Thank you, Minister Puri. Very helpful to give a little bit of a retrospective and then your forward views. We'll get more to them in a moment. His Excellency Al Kaabi, I don't want to make you blush, but I think this audience probably needs to know you were recognized as 2022 Energy Intelligence Forum Executive of the Year. That was just 2 years ago. You made a bold bet on the future of gas, and you positioned Qatar as a global LNG supplier of choice. Can you say a bit more about your vision and the role of Qatar in LNG as it relates to energy security, as we start this conversation on energy security?
Thank you for having me on this distinguished panel. His Excellency put it very well regarding, I think, people betting on the green transition very early, where none of us had a clue of where we were going. I think the majority of the countries were announcing net zero by 2050. You ask them, how are you getting there? They say by 2030, 40, we'll get 70% of our target, and the rest is technology improvement, which means we will try, we will strive, but not we will. Okay, most of them really don't have a plan to get there that is realistic. And what's happening today is that a lot of countries are realizing that they actually can't achieve these targets, and they are taking some 180-degree turn, and some are still living in that dream of being re-elected based on that green promise, unfortunately. But, and that is what causes all these volatilities that you're talking about. And then you had the pandemic, and then you had the Ukraine, and now the Red Sea, all these things, and they will not go away. I mean, the different things will happen. Traditional fossil fuel investment is fundamental. And when we took a decision in Qatar for the requirement of gas in the future, we looked at basic supply demand and the growth of humanity. And knowing that you will need the cleanest fossil fuel that burns today, when you couple it with carbon capture and sequestration, with the intermittent electricity that you can get from renewables, like wind, like solar, that people talk about like that's the solve all solution. It isn't. It will give you, in places where there is sun all the time, during the day, you'll get good power. And if the wind is always blowing, it will give you good power. But for cities, you can't depend on intermittency solely. So gas is going to be needed, and was, in our view, going to be needed. And we saw that 2025 to 2030 was the window where there is going to be shortage in gas. What happened with the Ukraine issue, where Europe didn't want to take more gas from Russia, which I think will change in the future at some point, gas became much more scarce, and then you had this big spike in gas, which is bad, because even as producers of gas, when you see these spikes, it destroys market, and it hurts consumers that you want to be healthy consumers for you for the long term. Because you want a balance between a healthy consumer that can do good growth and business, and you want a healthy supplier that can reinvest and invest and get good returns. So you need a real equilibrium, if you will, or some kind of a balance. And if you don't have enough investments, as His Excellency said, in the upstream, in gas, in oil, it's really going to be detrimental to consumers before suppliers in different countries around the world. And that's the reality of what's going on. One other element I would like to add is we all talk about renewable as the solution for electricity, which is true. It gives you a big electricity boost from renewables. But I've said this before in different conferences, renewable doesn't solve the petrochemical part. You can't transform solar to plastics. The majority of what you see around you and above you and all what we are sitting on, this is not pure leather, of course. I mean, so everything you see, the carpet, the clothes, everything comes, the glasses, the frames on the glasses that are not steel, all come from fossil fuel. So how are you going to replace that? It's not doable. The cars that we build, we say it's electric cars. You look at the plastics that are in it. You look at your dashboard. You look at the things that are in different things. I mean, you can think of tens of things that you have in your home. Ice boxes for picnics that we use, kayaks. All these are petrochemical, all the creams and some of the makeup that are used. So I think saying irresponsibly that we don't need fossil fuel and you're going against fossil fuel as humanity is like we're shooting ourselves in the foot. I believe that we need an energy transition. We need an energy transition that has renewable to the maximum possible, that is feasible for countries to execute. And you need to maximize that within the limits of your grid and what is required for you to sustain your cities with good electricity as a balance. We need to do that. Us as oil and gas sector, which we're investing also in renewables, but us as oil and gas sectors have to be as responsible as we can be technically in ensuring that all the equipment that you use is the least emissions possible. Okay, there is buying the best technology to reduce emissions, NOx, SOx, methane abatement has to be top priority to reduce methane emissions to the sky, basically, or to the air. And we have to use carbon capture and sequestration to do that responsibly and to get the best solution from a carbon footprint.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I'll come back to this. There's a lot to unpack there because you had many things. Energy for all of humanity, long-term investment, looking at 2035 plus. That's how you were thinking about it. The notion of energy and fossil fuels being used for petrochemicals and then doing it responsibly. So there's a whole bunch of themes in there. We'll come back to it. I want to shift over a little bit, about halfway around the world, to Honorable Vickram Bharrat. I know when I saw you on the panel, I was excited because I wanted to ask you about which of the 5 big legendary cricketers were your favorite. Is it Alvin? Is it Clive? Is it Shiv Narine, Rohan, or Lance? But that would have been the question maybe 15 years ago. All jokes aside, right now the story in Guyana is about energy, and after the discovery of Liza in 2015. So really looking forward to hearing a bit more of the incredible story of that oil find transforming the country, but also the world around it, right? Can you just maybe share a little bit about the last 8 years? What has it been like since Liza, and what that means for energy security for the world around you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the panel with these fine, distinguished gentlemen. And thank you, Excellency Minister Puri, for inviting us to be a part of this India Energy Week. We're happy to be here. And I know you mentioned a few older players, maybe before my time. I'm still a bit young. But now we have the new sensation, Shamar Joseph, that recently won the test match in Australia for West Indies. So he's Guyanese.
We're both showing our age, but that's okay.
Yes, quite honestly, I would say 5 years ago, Guyana was not known that much around the world. You know, even as I go to conferences and I visit different countries, some people are still trying to learn where Guyana is even now. But because of the recent find of hydrocarbons offshore Guyana, we have gained a lot of prominence and recognition over a short period of time. And quite honestly, the rate at which our petroleum sector is being developed in the country is unprecedented. Unprecedented in the sense that we started exploration in 1999. We made our first discovery in May of 2015, and then forest oil in December of 2019, and have moved from forest oil in 2019 to today producing 650,000 barrels of oil per day. Quite unprecedented. This is the kind of development that you don't normally hear of around the world. And already we have signed two production licenses that we will see two more FPSOs in Guyana waters in another 2 to 3 years from now. So we are well poised to be producing at 1.2 million barrels by 2027. We've already signed those production licenses. Our government, our policy, and our president and vice president has put it very simple. Our depletion policy in Guyana is to get the hydrocarbon out of the ground as fast as possible and to use that revenue to build the traditional productive sectors and the new sectors that are needed to take us into the future. Because we know the window is closing on hydrocarbons, not so much gas, but more oil. The window is closing. Some may argue against it. Some may say, yes, it's closing. That is another debate, because I personally believe that the window will be there. And if I may share a little story, I was in Uruguay for a climate change conference because I'm also responsible for the forests in Guyana, Guyana being the second most forested country in the world after Suriname. Suriname, it's about 91, 92% forest coverage. Guyana being about 86, 87% forest coverage. So I also have responsibility for the forests in Guyana. And I was asked by a gentleman at that conference to sign a petition. So I didn't know what was the petition about. So upon inquiring about the petition, he was actually asking me to sign a petition to stop oil production in the world. Now you're asking the minister that's responsible for petroleum in one of the newest petroleum producing country in the world. So my answer to him, I didn't tell him who I was, but I said to him clearly that I think you're approaching this problem wrong. Why is it that you're trying to stop production when you should be trying to stop demand? Because if you stop production and the demand still exists, then you're simply pressuring the ordinary people in countries like mine, countries like Africa and African countries, and the poorer countries basically will suffer. So rather than stopping production, work on reducing demand for fossil. And I think that is the approach that needs to be taken. And Minister Puri is correct. We have seen over the last few years a reduction in financing for new exploration activities. But at the same time, there were no preparation to move away from fossil to renewable. There wasn't full preparation, and we've seen that. We have seen that after COVID. We have seen that when Ukraine was invaded. We have seen coal plant being restarted around the world to generate electricity, and we know that coal plant is high in emission compared to any other source of energy provider. So there wasn't enough being done to transition away from fossil fuel. And I think that is the fundamental issue that we have. You know, sometimes we need to ask those questions, these fundamental questions. Yes, we are committed to moving towards 100% renewable. But how do we get there? The journey of getting there, how is it that it happened? It takes quite a lot of resources to get there. The Caribbean region, we are part of CARICOM. The Caribbean region, for example, it is estimated that we need at least 14 billion US dollars to achieve 47% renewable energy. Now, no one is going to come to CARICOM and say, take $14 billion. It won't happen because every country have their own challenges and they have their needs and they have their people to provide a better life too. So we believe in exploration and production of our hydrocarbon in a responsible, sustainable manner, but to use that resources to fulfill that commitment of achieving 100% renewable if we can actually do so. Because we strongly believe that at 2050, there will still be a window for fossil. But at that point in time, when demand goes down, the question will be, who will be allowed to produce? Which are the countries that will be allowed to produce at that point in time? And I would like to make a strong point now for countries like mine that have high environmental credential. We are probably one of the few oil-producing country in the world that is already carbon zero, carbon sink country. As a matter of fact, we are carbon negative. And when we have 10 FPSOs producing at 2 million barrels of oil per day, we'll still be a carbon sink country, mainly because of the vastness of our forests. Our forests, we have the ability to hold 19.5 gigaton of carbon. That is the capacity of our forests. Just to put it into perspective, our forest is as big as the United Kingdom. So it's more like a national or a global asset when you consider the whole conversation on climate change. So yes, we are moving apace with the development of offshore Guyana in our petroleum sector. We are probably one of the country to the fastest to have established a sovereign wealth fund. Just 2 years after production, there are countries that took 20 years, 30 years to move towards having a sovereign wealth fund in place. We did it after 2 years because we believe that oil can be a blessing or it can be a curse for any country. It depends on the management of that sector. And we, quite honestly, we have learned a lot from the mistakes made by other countries. And we have partnered and we have sought assistance and guidance from countries that have been in the business of oil and gas for a number of years, like my good friend Saad here, who have been helping us quite a lot, from Qatar, Minister Puri from India, Ghana, and so many other countries that we have drawn experience and best models that we are tailoring to fit our needs in Guyana. So we believe, yes, in the sustainable, responsible exploration and production of our hydrocarbons, but to use that revenue to achieve our targets that we would have set and to build the other sectors that will keep our economy going long after oil and gas. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. That was a good round trip of everything, including speed of learning, speed of production, and then energy transition. You put it all together. But I'll come back to you a bit on the VUCA world part of it. Your Excellency, really good to have you here. I think there's a lot you've said in the public domain over the last 6 months, and especially you've been a very strong voice around this notion of sharper focus on energy security, the world needing to be aware of energy security and being sharper on that. What do you see as the key issues that are driving your concern, and why have you taken to saying more and more about it, especially over the last 12 months?
Well, first of all, it's great to be back here in India for India Energy Week. I'd like to start by thanking you, Your Excellency, my dear friend, Minister Puri, for inviting this great gathering, going stronger year after year. Compared to last year, I was here the first time. It's good to see such a big turnout and such a diverse audience, and as well a diverse panel, I think. So back to your question, Pratap, I think it's been underestimated so long, the meaning and the impact of the words energy security. And probably it's just been tossed around as a simple term here and there in discussions, in panels like these and everywhere. But I think if we look at it from a different perspective and see the true meaning of energy security, I believe simply it is the cornerstone of economic growth and prosperity for all nations, all peoples around the world, for societal advancement and development, you name it, education, the clothes we wear, everything is ultimately linked to having the secure, affordable, reliable, uninterrupted source of energy. Be it oil, be it gas, be it renewables, be it coal. And this is how mankind has prospered and developed over all these years. So it's important when we talk about energy security not to underestimate the importance of energy security and how we can ensure energy security. How does the world achieve this goal? By many ways. For us in OPEC, we are strong advocates of ensuring energy security through maintaining reliable, uninterrupted flows of oil. Oil today represents over 30% of the global energy mix. When you add gas, we're talking about almost 60% of the global energy mix. It is significant. And therefore, it's important for us as a responsible group of producers in OPEC to ensure that countries like India, China, wherever it is in the world where there is demand for this commodity, are supplied adequately, affordably, and reliably. For us, one of the key issues is investments. And I've talked about investments, as you probably have noticed, repeatedly, about the importance of not undermining investments in oil. It is a critical step that the world has to continue. Let's remember that today, the world has to invest just to replace the natural depletion or natural decline in production, which is around 4 or 5%, let alone to cater for growth and demand. And there is a consensus, no matter what agency you work for, which independent reporting group or analytics group you work for, there is a consensus globally that oil demand will continue to rise, be it for 5, 10, 15, or 20 years. That's a different call. However, there is growth. So we need to invest today to be able to ensure that that security and reliability of that supply is maintained for consumption centers, for demand centers. We heard today from the Honorable Prime Minister the plans of how India, for example, is going to grow at the pace of the growth to bring it up to the third largest economy, to the additions of all the refining capacity that will be coming up in India. All of this requires significant investments. And I think we have, unfortunately, over previous years, taken it down a little bit on the priorities level to a lower level than where it really should be. Energy security, maybe looking at energy affordability, energy transition, which, by the way, I prefer to call transitions with an S at the end, because I do believe that part of achieving energy security is that each nation, each people has its own pathway. So when we talk about a transition, that means there's only one size, there's only one way, there's only one direction. But at OPEC, we have always advocated for multiple pathways for energy transitions. India has its own transition pathway. Country X may have another. Guyana, for example, Qatar may have another pathway. And this is the way we should, I believe, look at the importance of dealing with energy transitions, but also looking at the energy trilemma, which is affordability, accessibility, and reliability. And therefore, security is paramount to that structure of making sure that everybody gets energy. At OPEC, we continue to invest. We have requirements for investments that are at around $14 trillion for oil from now to 2045. That's over $600 billion per year. It's a significant amount. Is it an OPEC responsibility alone? No, we believe it's a global responsibility to shoulder this and to invest. And that's, I think, the key paramount factor that should lead to global energy security, not only for oil, but maybe for gas as well. There's a similar view for other commodities. Simultaneously, dealing with the climate issue by investing in technologies such as CCUS, direct air capture, promoting efficiency, promoting reducing flaring, reducing methane emissions. All of that has to all come in together. But we cannot just advocate for stopping investments, because that will ultimately endanger energy security.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Your Excellency, Mr. Puri, you wanted to add something to that?
I just wanted to try to make the discussion a little more provocative, because I think It's not a panel's job just to agree with each other and say nice things. You see, if you look at the trilemma, the issue of availability and affordability, they're actually linked. Because if affordability is not a criteria or not a consideration, then availability will always be there because it will be very expensive. What is a reasonable cost of energy? I don't mean just crude oil, any energy. And I think then you come to the sustainability part. My experience in the last 2 years has been that whenever prices, and this is partly because the world we live in, the economic recovery has been fragile. Half the world was in recession, the other half was flirting with the recession. So if the price of oil went up, I'm just citing one example, then demand tended to drop. And then you had a self-fulfilling prophecy. You had a situation where the energy transition took place faster. Today, I think the world can be predicted. Let's say out of 100 million barrels of crude oil production and consumption in a day, you can reasonably predict that this is how it's going to be divided. If price remains like this, world will continue. But I think 5 years from now, let me do some futuristic thinking. If you have some of the cleaner alternate fuels taking off, and I already see some developments on the gas front, because today the gas situation is very different from what it was some time ago. And if there is predictability, etc., let's say the green hydrogen story takes off in a big way. And all those predictions that we are talking about for 2030, today you're already in 24, so 5 years, maybe a little less, little later. And that's this thing. What would be the attitude of the suppliers and the consumers at that point of time? My own view is that at this point of time, if everybody can sit down and say, well, clearly the producers need investment in order to make existing resources, assets functional. You have something fine, year on year, it will diminish. And unless you put that investment, it will not be forthcoming. If there is let's say, an appreciable drop in the availability from, say, 102 million barrels a day, we've already down to 97. Let's say more drop takes place. What will happen to the price? Will the market affect it? Will the others? There are some people who say whenever this kind of a situation happens, the transition takes place faster. So far, but I'm not sure. Today, I think the challenge before us is to make sure that the transition, which means traveling from this point to the next, is done in an orderly manner. Is that we have access to traditional fuels, you are making steady and predicted transition to greener fuels, and that the world is not suddenly going to find itself without energy, because energy is the key driver of the kind of growth that we are having to grapple with.
It's a great provocation.
Not
No, it's a really good point. I would love to hear others weigh in on it, Your Excellency.
I think one thing I would say regarding really this discussion, or the point that His Excellency said, is he's absolutely true. You need to have a balance between the two. There is one element that I'd like to speak about that a lot of people don't talk about, which is we talk about additional investment, which both me, His Excellency Haitham, Guyana is already doing. We need more volume to come to the market. So we're saying because of the transition, not enough investments have been going, so that will hurt additional volume coming in, which will hurt consumers. At the end of the day, it hurts consumers more than producers. We should agree on that. I think one of the things that we don't look at, we're saying we want additional. That has its cost, okay? And it's different between one area to another, and cost of production is different. So you can't have really a number that you can, a catch-all number, if you will. But one element that people don't talk about is how much does it cost you to sustain the current production, okay? We have old fields in Qatar, oil fields. We produce 600,000. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the big producers, maybe Guyana is still new, but there is a natural decline of 5 to 10% that happens in every field. So that 5 to 10%, if over 10 years, okay, you've lost 50% of your production if you don't invest. So the investment in the old fields is needed all the time. And the older the fields, the more expensive it becomes. You have to have compression, you have to have different things, and so on. So just to sustain that production, you need hundreds of billions of dollars. This is not accounting for new production, okay, that's going to come in. So we always don't talk about that, but that's a huge sum of money that is needed just to maintain the 100 million that we have today. But I agree with His Excellency that we need to have a balance. Our argument has been in the energy sector is that the green push has been demonizing the oil and gas sector, okay, which India agrees with us, it's wrong. And what that has done is it has created a reduction in capital expenditure of 25% year on year since 2015. It's not now, it's since 2015. And the decline that happened because of the green push and some of the, the advancement of solar and others has helped. And then you had the COVID that brought the demand down and other factors, the economic slowdown before that, a big slowdown that happened before that. But the lack of investment increased the oil price before Ukraine. Okay, so I think making sure that we have a balanced approach where we're saying we need investments in fossil fuel that have to be enough to make sure that there is a balance in price. And if there is enough investment, I think the market takes care of itself from a supply demand. I assure you, all oil and gas producers that are responsible and know what they're doing, and all the big producers know that, is that a very big swing upwards hurts them, destruction of demand, okay, and could, bring forward some of the people going away from oil and gas and destructs us that way, which is irreversible. And the other way, where you destroy the price so much, it has the reverse effect where people can't invest. Right. And then you're into this vicious cycle of having, a problem once with the producer, once. Is there an equilibrium? Is there a middle solution or something? I think market has to be realistic about the transition, and legislator and policymakers have to be realistic. The West has to remember that there are 1 billion people that don't have basic electricity that they have, and we need to be realistic about everybody having a fair share of the energy and the growth that's going to happen in economies, and we can't be just looking at it from one side.
Just one quick one. I totally agree with my colleague, but I don't think the initial vilification of the fossil fuel industry came from the green energy advocates. It came from the do-gooders, the guys who sat and talked about the need to, have a utopia, have green energy, complete this thing. They're right from the public policy point of view that they were setting a target, but they were not realistic people. If you had followed their advice totally and not had the traditional fossil fuel industry going, there would have been a collapse. So I think the point is, in the second phase, as green energy seeks to take up the space available, but green energy also needs investment. I mean, there are not many countries which, like in India, the green energy transition is being fueled by our own companies, but many of them were in traditional. In the West also, traditional fossil fuel energies are now becoming green, so and so. So I think it's a little more complicated than the simplistic vilification, which I think is totally uncalled for. I can tell you that. And what we really need is a more balanced and realistic dialogue, and I think that's what we are having.
And if I may just elaborate, I mean, Qatar is the largest LNG, maybe one of the largest now. Maybe US has overtaken a little bit, I think, I'm reading, but we are, supplying a lot of LNG. But as responsible for electricity in the country, we put a plan to actually put solar in place. And last year, we inaugurated, the year before last, actually, in 22, we inaugurated our first power plant, and 10% of the power in Qatar that has ample gas is from solar. Okay, the biggest site for CO2 sequestration in the MENA region is in Qatar. We're actually sequestering 2.5 million tons per annum. So I think it's very important. And regarding the big oil companies, there are some that have, with the green push, have gone away from identifying themselves as oil and gas companies and become an electricity company or something else. Right. And now most of them are coming back and saying, we're an oil and gas company and we will invest in oil and gas. The UK itself has taken a 180-degree turn. Yeah. So yeah. I think there needs to be a balance.
Real good. Looks like the Honorable Minister wants to get in.
I quite agree that a balanced approach is needed, definitely. And I think at some point in time, the world, we all need to be real in order to make policy decisions. You can easily be carried away with setting targets, but are they real targets? Can we achieve those targets? Will we have the investments or the resources to achieve those targets? At some point in time, we will have to come to the realization that the argument is no longer or, but it is and. It is solar and wind and green hydrogen and fossil, because if we can get the kind of investment that we need in technology especially, and taking care of the emission simply by doing that. So it is not necessarily that using hydrocarbon or fossil fuel is detrimental, but it is the emission from the use of fossil fuel that is detrimental. So what if we can invest in the technology? We already have carbon capture, usage, and storage. What if we can invest in technology to deal with the emission? What if we can invest in countries like Guyana and others that have the forests to keep your forests intact rather than to increase deforestation around the world? So I believe these are some of the real facts that we need to look at some point in time, because the reality too is that the world's population will increase. Minister Puri, India is contributing a lot to that. The world's population will increase. It is estimated that maybe in another 20 years, we will probably have about 2 billion additional people in the world. There are hundreds of millions of people living in this world without electricity as we speak here today. Should we keep them in the dark because we are so consumed and so carried away with the environmentalist perspective and not trying to strike a balance so that everyone can enjoy the same kind of life that we do in some countries? So it's all about striking that balance. I fully agree. And investments is key to achieving the targets.
So maybe I wanted to just bring these three pieces together, and then Your Excellency Al Ghais, maybe you can comment on this in a moment. Your Excellency, Minister Puri, you asked the question, what is reasonable cost of energy and how does that actually affect the demand picture? I think everybody on this panel would agree that volatility in energy prices is generally not a good thing because it creates investment uncertainty. That's number one. Number two, there's two kinds of investments that are being needed. One is keeping the fossil fuel system invested in order to not create volatility and high prices. At the same time, investing in the system that is the transition fuels, right? And both of those together, one could argue, are going to create a higher price environment because there is multiple sources of investments that are needed in the energy system. And that's a little bit of the timing question on how do you actually manage both of those sets of investments in order to land reasonable energy prices. I don't know, I know you've thought deeply about investments in this space. So if you want to maybe comment on that, and I want to come back to uncertainty in a moment.
Maybe just in the time left, but I think touching on what their excellencies have mentioned, the key word again, balanced. Balance is the essence of everything. And I think also the word and as opposed to or. When we talk about the future, His Excellency from Guyana mentioned the population growth. In our forecast, we see the global population rising by 1.5 billion from now to 2045. Okay. Most of that's going to happen in non-OECD developing nations. It's not going to happen in OECD. That's number one. Number two, the size of today's global economy is going to double compared to what it is today by 2045. Now, all of this means two simple things. One, more energy is going to be required. We estimate 23% more energy requirements to fuel all of this from now to 2045. And number two, all forms of energy. And that's why I say and. It's not going to be renewables or gas, renewables or oil. It has to be renewables and gas, renewables and oil. Because the energy mix is actually growing in size. No single source of energy is going to be able to fuel all of that growth. And add to that equation the element that His Excellency mentioned about the energy poverty. We have so many people around the world who don't have the luxuries we take for granted of switching on, flicking on the lights, charging the phones, and moving away, let alone to go into the luxury of getting an EV and charging that EV once, twice, 3, 4, 5 times a day. Add to that urbanization. Today we're talking about, from now to 2030, in the next 6 years, over 500 million people, 500 million people around the world are going to move into new cities around the world. So if we talk about a city, just to put things into perspective, with a population of nearly 10, give or take 10 million in London, you're talking about 50 Londons. 50 new Londons around the world will be created just by the amount of people that will be developing and creating and moving into new cities. Now let's put this into context and figure out how much energy that will require. As I said earlier on, according to OPEC's research estimates in our World Oil Outlook, 23% more energy than what we are consuming today, and it's going to have to be everything that we can deliver. And in renewables is included. Renewables will grow at a fast pace, albeit from a very small base today. Oil will maintain its share. Gas will increase slightly. We believe that coal might decline slightly. But every source of energy will be required to be able to deliver and fuel the economic prosperity and growth that we all aspire for.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I got the 2-minute sign, but I want to get last question lightning round for each of our panelists here. Putting together uncertainty and collaboration as two themes. You mentioned non-state actors creating uncertainty. You have neighbors looking over your shoulders and creating uncertainty, and then there's uncertainty around geopolitics, elections, and then some of the permitting issues in the US around LNG and whatnot. Lightning round question, collaboration, Your Excellency, Minister Puri, is a theme that you hold close to your heart. What is the one piece of collaboration you would like to see?
No, you see, each of these has a certain streak of subjectivity in it.
Right.
When you talk about, reasonable, I mean, there's a subjective element in there. I mean, somebody can turn around and say, if it costs you $12 to extract a barrel and you sell it for $80, that's not reasonable. On the other hand, the other guy's built his entire ecosystem around it, okay? I think collaboration is an imperative. It's not, is it desirable? I think it's an imperative. Because if you've got uncertainty, and that there's no denying, you've got uncertainty, uncertainty will lead to confusion, it will lead to chaos. So I think discussion and collaboration are the two recipes you can follow in order to overcome the uncertainty.
Your Excellency.
I think being pragmatic in what we try to portray to people, whether we're politicians or technicians or technocrats, we need to be very pragmatic and actually show the real story, not the story that gets us elected or lets us keep our job.
Honorable Minister.
Yeah, we are discussing energy security, but it's also critical that we are reminded that food security is equally important. And to achieve food security, especially when we are speaking of an increased population, energy security is so critical, very, very critical. Just a quick point. I know you mentioned some issues with countries and border issues. Guyana has been one of those countries we have actually been a victim to Venezuela claiming a huge portion of our territory. We have always said that we took this matter to the International Court of Justice, and we have said that we will respect the court's decision. So collaboration is good, but it's good when you have partners that want development among member states, that we are working towards one objective and not working apart and against each other.
Your Excellency.
I think the key word is dialogue, dialogue, and again dialogue, really. To overcome all these challenges, whether it's energy issues that we are talking about today, we have to have dialogue. We have to stop pointing fingers, vilifying the oil and gas industry, as was mentioned earlier on. This is not constructive. We have to face reality, and as His Excellency of Qatar said, be pragmatic about dealing with a realistic solution where we can all come to one solution, because we all ultimately have the same goal. It's just different pathways to reach it. So I think dialogue is the key, and that's the only way forward. We at OPEC have been very vocal about dialogue. In fact, Minister Puri will tell you we have an ongoing strong dialogue with India. We meet once or twice a year. And this is the same with not only with producers, but also with consumers. We have it with India, with China, and we believe this is the essence of how the world energy scene must be handled in the future.
Thank you, Your Excellencies. A round of applause for this amazing panel here. Thank you.